if there was a client, of course, who had Mercury squaring Saturn in their birth chart, what would you tell them about what that aspect means?
Yeah. So, as far as from experience, I would say to not be so harsh on perfection, not be so harsh on being like masterful or skillful at everything. You can do things just for enjoyment. You don't have to be the best. I kind of have this um like want to set off and do something, learn a new skill and kind of be amazing at it. And just get discouraged along the journey of learning some sort of skill. Um, you know, I would also say that play into naturally, your natural ability to find creative solutions for difficult situations. Mercury is very curious and playful, and Mercury is also rules over inventions and things like that. And Saturn is difficult situations and tasks. So Mercury Square Saturn has this wonderful ability to be um, really, really creative in hard places. Um, that's probably like my one favorite thing about it. And squares are dynamic, so there's often this tension, but it creates results as well too. So it's the learning process. It's learning through the struggle, learn overcoming the difficult challenge. Um, I would also recommend to play on the natural ability for um, being able to focus on some sort of very involved study. Uh, Saturn likes to do things slow. Saturn likes to take its time. Saturn is like, okay, there is no real end to this type of thing. And it's kind of like astrology. It's astrology, you're always learning. You never have reached the last chapter of learning astrology. Um, so it's always playing into that creative nature of wanting to learn more and wanting to better yourself and knowing that like you're not going to always be super awesome or understand the concepts right away. But once you overcome that challenge or that difficult task or situation or learning experience, that's going to stay imprinted in your brain, and you're going to be able to really help people with any sort of situation that they're in.
Hi, I'm Ruby, and this is the Beautiful Podcast. Difficult placements in our birth charts are empty containers, vessels which once held diamonds. The truth of these aspects have been littered with shame, guilt, and the like. This is why the Beautiful Podcast seeks to uncover the mysteries and hidden jewels that have remained buried for far too long. Each aspect is a shining jewel in our apron that with some care can be seen and realized. Okay, so I'm super happy to be here speaking with Raya. And that's how I say your name, correct? Raya or Raya?
It's Raya.
Raya. Oh, Raya, that's nice. Like sunrise. It has that kind of feeling. Cool. And we're going to be speaking about Mercury squaring Saturn. That's what Raya has going on in her birth chart. She's an astrologer. On the other hand, I am an astrology enthusiast, and I have Mercury opposite Saturn. So there are some similarities, but obviously some difference, right? Okay.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely similarities.
But I also find it really interesting that we both have Mercury in Libra. So I kind of wanted to know, I guess, about your experiences. Like something that I noticed was whenever I am decorating a space, um, people always say, "Oh, this looks like a fairy den." And I'm like, "Really?" They're like, "Yeah, it just looks like a very like fairy kind of vibe." And then I think about it, I'm like, there are fairy lights, there's greenery, there are like butterflies everywhere, but it's just natural. It's what I think looks nice. And so I started to think about that Mercury and Libra, and it kind of felt like it had a bit of that kind of fairy vibe. So I'm a little curious about, I guess, what sort of things kind of come up with you with Mercury and Libra. And of course, that was just because of hands is the connection. But
Yeah, I definitely noticed like I have busy hands. Um, but like as far as I associate a lot Libra and Venus, so like the ruling sign of Libra, being associated with cleanliness because it's like the process of cleansing and anointing something before ritualistic practice. That's how kind of the ancients saw it. So I noticed that I want my space to be beautiful, but I also want it to be organized, clean, simplistic. That's not always easy when you live with other people, but like cleanliness is a big thing for me, especially with my space. And I notice that my mind gets very overwhelmed. Like if there's too much going on in my space, I'm kind of like I wouldn't say minimalist because I do like to like have my trinkets and stuff like that. But yeah, I like having a nice organized space. Um, some things that are pretty. I like smells, burning incense, things like that, uh, which are all associated with Venus, which Libra is a Venus ruled sign.
that's interesting. That was going to be one of the questions that I was going to ask you a little bit later. You know, so I'll just ask it now. But what is your relationship with rituals? Do you use rituals to accomplish, I guess, long-term goals in your life? I'm thinking about that third house and how in ancient astrology, right? Yeah, ritualistic. It's about the sort of daily practices of worship. Um, so there's just this thought about that. So I'm curious.
Yeah, so I'm not I would call myself a little bit more chaotic when it comes to rituals. Maybe that's other placements in my birth chart, but it's more when I feel inspired to do it, not necessarily, I'm an astrologer, so I do believe in timing for things, but I also believe that you need to do something when the time is right for you in your busy life. So like I'm not going to, I have two small kids. If the full moon or new moon is exact at a certain time of day and it's not the right time for me, I'm not going to do some sort of ritual on that exact time. I'm going to carve out space for myself for that time. As far as like daily rituals, I mean, I have my loose schedule where, I do the dishes at a certain time. I clean up and tidy up the space around a certain time. So there's those kind of daily ritualistic habits, you would say. Um, I do like go out and talk to the planets at night. I love, going outside after everyone's asleep or waking up early in the morning before the sun rises to kind of be outside. I try to write every day as well too. That's probably what I feel most manifested for my Mercury Libra is writing. And writing wasn't always a very easy thing for me. Growing up, I had a lot of learning disabilities, especially when it came to like phonics, reading, writing. I wasn't able to fully read by myself until I was in like third grade. So like around what, 8 or 9 years old. Um, but like I consider my ritualistic practice kind of being writing as well too. That's where my like creative inspiration really comes is musing with the planets.
Um, a little off topic, but it's cool. Going back to that Sun Mars conjunction in Virgo, I feel like a lot of the things that you're sharing, I also kind of link them to that kind of energy as well. And then now with you sharing about some struggles with reading, phonics, etc. Um, I guess growing up, were you someone who was more like all about that hands-on life, like doing things physically, practically versus like kind of sitting down somewhere, reading, writing? Like I'm just curious, or was it a mixture, or were you, I don't know, something totally different from whatever I'm suggesting, I guess, or asking?
was more hands-on. Mercury is also associated with sports as well too, and athletes. So, with my son Mars being ruled by Mercury, um, I was definitely like more into sports than like sitting down and reading and writing or drawing. I was a pretty active child. I was always in some sort of activity. Um, but getting back to your question, uh, let me think. And there's my Saturn square Mercury coming through where I lose my train of thought and I kind of have to stop and think. Um, but definitely hands-on. I was more hands-on, like learning through the experience. And that's probably has a lot to do with that Sun Mars. I know we're not supposed to be talking about it, but that Sun Mars combination in Virgo, which is, a Mercury ruled sign, definitely more hands-on.
And then just before we were speaking about this, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. You were saying that, you love going outside when it's dark out and speaking to the planets. I recognize that that must be a very intimate kind of moment for you, but are you cool with sharing a bit about, I guess, what you talk about? Maybe what you dream about? Because you've got Saturn conjunct Neptune, so I'm kind of curious. Like, is it a dreamy experience? Like, what, what is the experience?
Yeah, part of that Saturn Neptune conjunction in the sign of Capricorn, John or generation, so like late 80s, early 90s time period. Um, yeah, I love dreaming. I definitely I associate Mercury a lot with dreaming as well too. So definitely can have some pretty prophetic dreams as far as like, dreaming about someone and then all of a sudden they come up in my life again. Or dreaming about things like having these reoccurring dreams about places, and then all of a sudden months later I'm at that place. That's happened numerous times. My mother remembers when I was younger, I would have kind of premonitions in like a dream state where I'd be like, oh, so and so was painting her house white, and weeks later she decided to paint the interior of her house white, and it was bright and sparkly, kind of how I described it. um so yeah, but getting back to as far as like going outside and talking with the planets, I don't necessarily like talk out loud to them. It's more in my head, or I kind of just look up and wonder. Um, like I see the physical planet, the seven visible planets, and I develop a connection with them, and that's usually where I get my inspiration as far as writing and or um astrological downloads or insight about some sort of something, is being able to have that physical connection with the planet. Even though it's, I'm not verbally speaking out loud something about that. I kind of just let whatever whatever the cosmos has to say kind of come through without any sort of expectation, like, oh, help me, like guide me on this struggle that I'm dealing with. It's more of just like looking up, being like, hey, I'm here. Hey, you're here. What do you want to tell me, without any initiation as to what they should be helping me with.
Initially, I was going to say it sounds like it's a very visual kind of experience that you're having with the planets, but then it also sounds auditory because you said, of course, not maybe not physical hearing, but you're being receptive and intuitive. Um, so, what's been your journey with Mercury? Um, Maybe let's start with maybe pre astrology. I don't know when it came into your life, but I guess the ways that you were interacting with because it sounds very special with Mercury in this special way, before you had the tools and language to kind of get a bit more of an understanding of what was happening.
Yeah, so I started astrology, like really like being like, oh my gosh, there's a birth chart and there's planets and other things. I knew like sun sign astrology since I was little, but it was like 2017. So before that, I had a good portion of my life um having to deal with this without really understanding what it was. Uh, Early childhood, like I mentioned, it was a lot of learning disabilities, a lot of difficulty when it came to reading, writing. Um, I was never like formally diagnosed, but I believe that there's some sort of like form of dyslexia where I'm always saying like I'm thinking the right words in my head, but they come out different or they come out wrong. So there's that Mercury Square Saturn where it's, Mercury being speech, Saturn being some sort of like delay and or difficulty with speech. I still do it all the time as I say the wrong thing even though I'm thinking the correct thing. Um, I think that, like that was my early years. There was a lot of uh, intervention in like elementary school or what you would call grammar school, as far as helping me read and write. That was probably, like how it kind of showed up, early childhood. And then like later on in life, it was more of enjoying like repetitive motion. So like kind of like factory line production, when I was working, um, like I enjoyed things like that. I worked in an industrial embroidery place, and that's very like Mercury Saturn to me. It's this repetitive motion of, doing things in an assembly line fashion efficiently, productively. You kind of get in this trance-like state where it just becomes second nature as well too. So that kind of showed up more like, out of school stuff like that. Um, and that was kind of my experience a lot with Mercury Saturn square in my life before astrology. But I didn't really fully understand this aspect of my birth chart realistically until like 2 years ago when I was fully aware of astrology, where I fully realized it. Um, Interesting facts about this aspect for myself. So, Mercury moves fast, so it does square or make aspect to Saturn often. So a lot of people have this aspect, realistically in the birth chart. But my Mercury is stationing retrograde the day of my birth. So Mercury is stopped in the sky, and my Saturn stationed direct the day before my birth. So Saturn and Mercury are both appeared to be stopped in the sky on in my birth chart. So I feel like that like just adds a little bit more level of prominence when it comes to this aspect where um you know I'm a little bit more introspective where I have a lot to say, but I'm just going to say it in my mind, and I don't feel like I need to speak it out loud, in conversation with people, stuff like that. That's what I've been kind of noticing more and more is like my internal dialogue is always going, but it's not always coming out.
Um, Full transparency, I feel a little intimidated by you. Um, I know it sounds silly. You're a wonderful person, but it's just incredible to hear, I guess, the way that you've, because, you never know who someone is, right? Until you get the chance to talk to them and they start to open up. And then there are all these wonderful things, and you're like, holy crap, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Um, but obviously this has never, it's not like you just it's always been a nice sort of feeling, right? There are ups and downs in your life, and even like you said, the struggles when you were younger, right? So but I don't know, I just felt like maybe I should just, yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling, but it's okay. We'll keep it moving. um Something I was noticing is that there are a lot of circles. It just feels like there are a lot of circles around you, and like the dream catcher behind you, obviously it's a circle, but even the way that the feathers are kind of swooping, and your earrings, and then your spacers, and and then your necklace, it just feels, and then even your hair, the way it curls, like there's a lot of circle. um I don't really have too much of a question behind that, but I don't know, are circles your favorite shape? Could that happen to be, or are you kind of open?
I do like them. Like they're very like appealing and symmetrical, and they're soft. They're not like super pointy and sharp. So yeah, but that's funny that you said that because I noticed it as well too. I'm like, oh wow, there is a lot of circles. Maybe it's something having to do with like what came into my head when you said that was like the image of like the snake eating its own tail, where it's like
Mm.
a symbol of like regeneration and rebirth, something along those lines.
Huh. When I was thinking about this aspect, I was thinking about Mercury, so feet, movement, um, and then I guess Mercury, generally speaking, is I guess short distance travel. But that Saturn and it being in Capricorn of all signs, it feels like, you're on this sort of long journey. Um, and so, I guess what's your experience with maybe travel and journeys, whether they be physical or any other sort of journeys, I guess?
Yeah, as far as physical journeys, I travel. I don't travel a lot. I love driving. Like I swear I was an over-road trucker in like some past life because I just love like hitting the road and driving. Like I could drive for hours. I'm kind of like a dog where like road trips are really fun for me. Even like the laborious parts where it's like traffic and this and that. Um, I don't travel a lot. Like short distance travel, you could say I do. I live in an area that like, it's common to have to drive 20 minutes an hour just or 20 minutes to 30 minutes just to get to a grocery store and or in town, quote unquote. Um, as far as like metaphorical travel, um, yeah, I do that a lot in my head. Like I'm always like somewhere else. Dreaming, like um there's a lot of going places in my dreams, you could say, like going to somewhere, but it's also like repetitive going to the same place where it's like it's the same scenery, the same event, the same um situation. But it's not always like, every single night I have that same dream. It's, I have a dream one time and then like 2 months later it's a dream in the same location. But yeah, Mercury definitely is associated with travel, especially in that third house, which is associated with like short distance travel or like local environment. Um, but I'm a busybody. Like I like going out and doing stuff, whether it just be like going out and exploring my surroundings or just getting out of the house, um, to kind of like refresh my mind. Um, it's actually funny though that you said something about travel because I get a lot of my inspiration, um, especially for writing when I'm driving. Like I get like I'm like, oh, like there it is. Like I get like little snippets of stuff. So I do a lot of voice texting when I'm driving to like remember what I'm thinking. If I'm writing an article, if I'm thinking about a transit, if I'm thinking about a client, I do a lot of voice texting while driving because a lot of stuff comes to me, um, when I'm behind the wheel.
I like literally yesterday I got, well, you're in the States. I got my G2, so it's the thing that comes after the learner's permit for driving. So I can like drive on my own now, not totally there, but somewhat. And I kept having this feeling that it was going to be really good for my development, so we'll see how that goes. Um, but obviously, previous to having my license, I would basically walk everywhere. I just started biking. But whenever I find that my ideas come when I'm moving, like even downloads, it's always when I'm moving and then I have to stop, like you said, get out the little voice note thing just so that you don't, because you're going to forget loads of it, but you want to keep as much as you can, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting, that sort of connection there. Huh.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I definitely do that. And like as far as like that movement, like I feel that as well too. Like I am I concentrate best when I'm moving my body. So like if I'm doing yard work or chores or anything, I have a podcast on, I'm listening to it, and it's usually long form podcasts. I do a lot of long form, like 2, 3 hour podcasts. And I just put it on and I listen. And that's like I can retain the information a lot more when I'm moving my body. And I feel like that too, as well as this Saturn square, Mercury showing up. It's like retaining and learning information, and being able to concentrate better when you're moving the body.
That's interesting. Um, I there was a time in my life where I felt like I concentrated best when I was completely still, but it always felt like I was traveling internally. So even the stillness, in the stillness, there was still movement. So I find that kind of interesting what you shared. Um,
Yeah, I meditation is not my thing. Like I have a very hard time because like you were kind of saying, it's like you're going off somewhere else, even though you're not physically going. So, my mind is doing that constantly.
um, so there was an astrologer who she was just saying how Libra is about seeking internal and relational balance. So, instead of that kind of, I think there's kind of a general assumption that Librans are balanced. But she was kind of saying, well, no, like there's this desire to seek balance. So there can actually be a lot of like chaos happening internally. So with you and me, but you having Mercury and Libra, I'm wondering what your experience has been in seeking balance.
To tell you the truth, I don't really think about that. I understand that life is chaotic at all times. Like no matter how much peace feel like no matter how much peace it seems like there are always moments of chaos and there is always some sort of discomfort. And maybe that's my Saturnian energy coming through where I understand that like there's always going to be struggle and conflict and there's never going to be perfect balance. And I've just kind of come to accept that where it's like I find the thrill in overcoming the obstacle, that obstacle and being like, I did it. Now I'm ready for the next obstacle. Um, but I don't really think about like finding internal balance, relationship balance. It's like I'm just kind of content with like riding the wave, I guess you would say. And maybe that's just my Aquarius disassociation moon where I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, it is what it is type of thing.
Okay, cool. Okay, I see you. That's awesome. I mean, rather than getting like bogged down and yeah, because like sometimes things can feel so heavy, right? So instead of getting bogged down, why not move and continue to strive, right? On that long journey kind of vibe. I see you.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite astrologers, Reinhold Ebertin, he wrote a book, The Combination of Stellar Influences. And one thing he says about Saturn Mercury combinations is um, a difficult and laborious rise in life. And that's kind of how that's kind of how I've seen my life. And I feel like that a lot of people have seen it that way is I'm always kind of seem to be doing the impossible task or taking on a lot to prove that I can accomplish hard things, but they're not like hard workouts every day, like not something like that. It's long form work that is going to be some sort of um like achieving moment or what's the word I'm looking for? It's very Saturnian. Um, like perseverance type of thing. Like I feel like my whole life is mental perseverance.
Wow, okay. Very, very cool. Um okay, so then are you someone who makes your thoughts I guess, practical, tangible, a reality? Maybe not easily, but it's like if you I guess like what does that process look like for you when you're kind of I guess, deciding, whether consciously, unconsciously, kind of, like what maybe you feel is worth your time and effort to build over a long time? What does that process kind of look like, generally speaking?
Yeah, so and I feel like this has a lot to do with that Sun Mars conjunction is I'm pretty impulsive. If I have an idea, I'm like, let's go for it and figure it out along the way, man. Like, like I kind of see like the broader vision. And that could also have to do a lot with the fact that I have also too with this Mercury square Saturn, I have Jupiter opposing Saturn. So Jupiter is also squaring Mercury. So um there's a lot of grand vision in my head of like, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and not really thinking about the hardships along the way, and just dealing with the hardships as they come. So maybe like a little bit of optimism when I like have an idea, like, hey, let's do this, even though it's seems absolutely impossible, but I can kind of picture it in my mind's eye what it's going to be like at the end. Um, what else was I going to say? Yeah, but I'm pretty impulsive. Like I don't really have like a thought process of like, oh, I'm going to be super practical about this. Typically what yeah, typically I'm pretty impulsive. There is moments where I'm like, maybe we should think about it a little bit before we do something, but it's usually acting on complete like just gun it, man.
Um, so like how, so I guess going back to that whole kind of like Mercury downloads kind of visionary um, a vibe that you carry, how delicate in that way are your, I guess, your ideas and your thoughts? Because when I think about something as, at least for me, I experience Neptune, like Neptune, Mercury. In this case, for you, it's like Mercury, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus. But I kind of, because I actually also have a Neptune Uranus conjunction. So I experience like the thoughts to be kind of like delicate. It's like I feel like I'm grasping it or just starting to, and then it's like it dissolves. So, if I want it too much or if I pursue it too directly, it just feels like it kind of floats away. I mean, I'm also like a Pisces rising with the moon on the ascendant, you know what I mean? So there's other stuff going on. But I'm curious, like, how do you experience thoughts, Mercury, your visionariness? How do you experience that?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it super delicate. You know, I, like Libra being like a Venus ruled sign, like we think of it like soft and feminine and beautiful and but we also have to remember that it's the masculine temple of Venus. So there is that kind of um like outward projection of the energy. And I feel like with my thoughts is they can be very harsh. They can be very like uh kind of in your face. But they're not, you know, I guess, and this is relating back to like how you were talking about like as far as decision making and stuff like that. If I have a thought and I think about it more than like a couple of times, I'm like, that's probably something that I should act on. Um, I don't retain a lot in my brain that's not useful to me. My brain is always on, it's always thinking, it's always trying to explore and understand. Um, so yes, I pay attention to the little details. Um, but I also like know when and what to let go of. That's not important to me. I don't know if that's answering your question, but um, yeah, I wouldn't call my thoughts gentle. I would call them somewhat aggressive, like somewhat aggressive, somewhat in my face, somewhat loud. Maybe it's that Saturnian energy of just being harsh or being cold or being distant or being hard. That's kind of like, if I could describe my thoughts, is they would be hard. Like not like, oh, this is difficult. Like just the
Solid.
like it's hard, it's not like soft and flowy.
Hmm. Okay. Um, okay, and then we can also speak about that sort of feeling of conservation. When I think about Saturn, especially being in Capricorn, and then also that connection between the third house and the sixth house. I wonder what your I guess what that sort of experience is like. When I think about third house, sixth house, both sort of like Mercury connections. Um, and so I think about a sort of hyperactivity, I guess, or just this sort of expenditure of an energy. But then when I think about Saturn, I think about conservation, I think about wisdom, I think about patience, working towards something over time. With Virgo, we have Virgo sun here, but you're a Virgo sun and a Virgo Mars. Um, we can get really bogged down in the details of things and kind of just see, the trees. Whereas Saturn and Cap, I presume, is about seeing the forest, right? So curious about your relationship with conservation versus expenditure of energy.
Yeah. I've always been a busybody. Like I'm just a high energy person. Um, and that probably has a lot to do with that air element. Air is air is relatively quick moving.
Mm.
But the best way to describe it or give you like an analogy of like my view on conservation is, like I was saying, I've always been into sports. And I know like when I'm in the moment of doing any sort of sport, um, I know when to conserve my energy, even though I'm physically doing something, and when I have to exert myself. And it's kind of like just this switch that turns on in my brain without really having to think about it. And there's that mercurial energy where it's the movement of the body. So I feel like it's a more intuitive thing for me. When I think about it too much, um, always feel like I have to be productive, and I can't, like, I get down on myself if I'm having like, lazy, rotten bed days, as they say. Um, so I feel like I'm better at conserving my energy when I'm not thinking about it. But when I'm overthinking it, um, there's that Saturnian hard, no, you have to be productive, you have to achieve and accomplish something. Um, you have to uh do your tasks and your chores, stuff like that.
Now I'm thinking about Saturn as the grandfather. Did you have like a grandfather or two who were maybe that you found to be very special, who you were close with, or are still, if they're in good health and such?
Yeah, I had one grandfather growing up. My father's side, he passed away in the 70s, so well before I was born. I was close to him. I wouldn't say like super close to him. Um, I found that as far as as far as in my adult life, my really meaningful friendships have been more with older people. Um, like, I have friends my age, but the people that I found really special, and they're not necessarily man or but they're older, they have some sort of wisdom, something about them, um, in that sense. Yeah, but I wasn't like I wouldn't like say like, my grandfather and I had like this, what you see in movie relationship as far as grandchild and
Hallmark.
grandfather.
Mm. Hmm. So then, like, what's your relationship with, I guess, like wisdom and aging? It sounds like you're someone who values, like you just said, for some reason you've had really special relationships with people who are older physically. So, yeah, what's your own sort of experience with your own kind of wisdom?
Yeah, so I feel like I had to kind of grow up relatively quickly, or I wanted to. Maybe I wasn't forced to. I just really wanted to be an adult for some reason, and now I'm like, crap, I'm an adult. I have to do adult things. Um, but as far as like aging, I think the aging process itself is beautiful. I think all seasons of life are beautiful. Uh, you know, the wrinkles on your face tell stories, the smile lines, the wrinkles around your eyes from, laughing. Um, but I also think that um, my relationship with aging is it's inevitable and it's not something that we can fight. And I think that's what I have the hardest time with like social media culture these days is everyone wants to look young and return back to their form, but no matter what you do to alter your body, um, you can't go back to those younger years. And it's something that we kind of have to look back in retrospect. I think that aging isn't an excuse to become less caring to your body, or like quote unquote lazy just because you're old. I think that the body can still move no matter how old you are, as long as you're taking care of yourself. Um, in, what you find the right way to move your body. I think that there's no like one complete package as far as exercise routine. But anyways, um, yeah, I don't know, aging is a weird thing, man. It's, looking back at life, it seems like it was a completely different lifetime for me, and I've lived numerous lives. And I was a completely different person back then when I was, but also like the older I get, the faster time goes. Um, and the past seems so far away. It's a crazy, crazy thing.
Are you someone who believes in fate or free will, or both?
I have wrestled with this question for quite some time. Um, I guess I believe in both. I think that things are fated no matter what. The nuances of what is fated changes determining on your free will and what you choose to do. Um, I I don't think that we have the ability to change what has been quote unquote fated or destined. I try not to use, you know, in traditional astrology, so what like practice Hellenistic astrology, that was a big thing. What is fate and what is free will? Is there both? Is there one? Um, but yeah, I definitely think that events, situations, people, places are fated. Um, but ultimately we have free will. If a terrible situation happens, we have the free will to not let it drag us down. If a wonderful situation happens, we have the free will to, um, act on that situation. So I haven't fully figured it out yet, and I feel like I'm not fully able to articulate it because it's such a complex um, area, especially in astrology. Um, but I would guess I would say I would believe in both as of right now. I might change my mind.
Different eras. Okay. Um, so, but why have you wrestled with it? Like, you know how sometimes people kind of say that, like, oh, I have really thought about this thing, but you can tell they're just kind of saying it, which is cool. We just, because they're continuing, right? Because we're having a conversation. But like when you said that, it felt like there was a shift in your eyes. Like I could feel that, like, whoa, you really do spend a lot of time wondering about this, trying to, I guess, understand for yourself. So I'm kind of curious, like, what maybe spurs you on in pursuing uh, understanding of that.
Yeah, so like, and I feel like the more I get into astrology and the more I study timing techniques, especially, so, like progression, zodiacal releasing, things like that, is the more I believe in fated events because like we can look out into the future and see there is something that is going to be happening in the area of career, partnerships, health. Um, but we can't predict the nuance. I certainly can't. I can see that there's something there. I can't say, you're going to break your leg in 10 days, as an example. But I can see that there's something there and the topics are going to come up. Um, but like, but we have the free will to decide. Like I can go decide if I want to have pizza tonight, but maybe it's like the cosmos speaking through me saying, go get pizza. And I go to the pizza place and I meet this person that inevitably becomes my best friend or creates some sort of career opportunity for me. So there's just like this, it's like a tangled web in my brain, I guess you could say, because I'm like, well, but what if? What if like your free will is just you perceiving it as free will and when it all in reality it's fate because there's some sort of guiding principle behind all of it. Um, but yeah, I guess I believe in free will the most when we have the free will to act on how we perceive terrible situations. Yes, we can feel sorrow and grief and sadness and hurt and anger in those terrible situations. Um, but we have the free will to let go of those feelings or hold on to those feelings, ultimately. And that's kind of how I guess like that's my Saturnian nature, like always like thinking of the worst, where it's like going back to that. Um, yeah, I think about it a lot. Coincidences, it's like, what is a coincidence? Is it even a coincidence? Is it you experiencing something that you've already experienced before in a previous life or a future life, and you're just jumping timelines? And then I get into all these interdimensional thoughts and feelings about it all. Um, but I think that maybe as of right now, I feel like we're not to meant to know what is real as far as fate and free will. And it's just something that we'll discover when we're not on this physical plane. We'll discover some sort of answer because, like my son said uh, one day to me, he said, there are some questions in this world that will never have answers. And that's just kind of how I feel about fate and free will at this point in my life.
Um, there was such a feeling about hope. I keep getting this feeling about hope with you. It feels like you're a very, I don't mean this in a naive way, not at all, but genuinely, there's this really lovely, beautiful, shining beacon of hope that it just feels like you're someone who is hopeful. I don't know how to say, like, would you say, especially when you said, we have the choice as to how we're going to experience things, yeah.
Um, I definitely, so I like to think that I am hopeful. Um, Life gets in the way sometimes. I am not the most positive, bubbly, uh, nice person as always. I've struggled with like emotional disorders my whole life. I've really come to understand that like um the cycles of those emotional disorders where I can recognize the symptoms before they really start, which has helped a lot. And there's that Saturnian energy once again coming through. Um,
Sorry, wait, why is that Saturn? Because over time you've grown. Like, why is that Saturnian?
Saturn can be pessimistic, but it's also the wisdom that comes through aging and like experiencing things. So there's that pessimistic, Um, I live in the Northeast of the United States, so seasonal depression is a big thing because we have less sunlight. It's cold. You can't get outside. Leo season is my season. So this time of year, I'm definitely like a more optimistic, bubbly person. Um, but yeah, so what was I saying? Um, I like to think that overall I'm an optimistic person. I can get very pessimistic. I can get very this is never gonna come to fruition. We need to just give up and stuff like that. Um, as far as daily things, but the overall arching theme of life, um, as far as if you look like birth to death, like I'm not afraid of any of that. So I just see it as a process.
Um, what you were saying about struggling with emotional, I guess, well, I'll say like dysregulation, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Um, you know, I, I've also have and, continue to struggle with that. Um, and when I think about that, obviously I think about the moon. Um, and I'm also thinking about circles and cycles. It seems like you're someone who kind of sees life and things, situations very much um, in that kind of whole way, that full way, like circular, like you were saying about the snake eating its tail, that rotation. Um, and then there was also this thought about like werewolves and the moon. Um, I was born on a full moon, so uh, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Um, okay, so what's been your experience with maybe having to re-regulate? Um, maybe when you feel like you fall into that sort of dysregulated space.
Hmm. Definitely space. Like I need space from everything and everyone. Like I need to like I enjoy my solitude and my aloneness, which is not easy when you're married and you have two kids.
Mm.
Um, so like that's one thing is just being vocal of I need to like leave right now, and like reset myself. I've also, and this is not for everyone. I'm not like a herbalist or I'm just experimenting with my body and I know it works. Um, is like plant allies has really helped regulate my nervous system, my mental state, and it's not like, taking these every single day. It's a constant change, like you were kind of saying with like the cycles and the circles is um I listen to what my body needs as far as my intuition, like a plant pops into my head and I'm like, okay, I need to be taking that for a little bit to kind of help regulate whatever's going on. Um, and that's probably what's been best for me. Um, Definitely moving my body. Like that's one thing is like I need to like exert some sort of energy because then it gets bottled up. Eating healthy, of course, I think that that's a given for everyone. I've noticed that my emotional state is trash when I eat trash. So when I'm ingesting bad things, my emotional state gets very affected. Um, but yeah, you know, so like in summary, taking space if it's, moments of a lot of chaos or upheaval, plant allies that kind of just come to me when I feel like I need them, moving my body and eating correctly, which has been like the best medicine realistically.
Um, interested in so when I think about Mercury and Libra, I think of truth, justice, ethics, what's right. So I'm kind of curious about maybe what sort of stand you take in terms of like applying whatever your own personal values are to the life that you're living. Is that something that maybe is kind of a natural process for you, or is it something that you think about, and especially with that Aquarius moon, whatever your ethics are, your morals are, and then I guess having moments of having to choose to stick by them, to be guided by them?
I feel like I feel like that's so in my younger years, I feel like I was kind of just go with the flow, didn't want to like ruffle anyone. Like I was very like, okay, whatever. Like um, and as I get older and I create a life for myself where I am more independent and I don't have to rely on um, structures and systems, it's easier for me to live within my own integrity and my own like what I find valuable. Um, and I think that it's one of those difficult things living in modern society where not everyone has the ability to like live a life that like upstand like is aligned complete with their values. For example, having to work a job that's unfulfilling, it's creatively, spiritually, having to work for a company that you don't agree with, like if you work for a big corporation, um you have to work for that company just because it's the job and you need money and you need to survive. But as I get older and as I like have so much help from my husband for creating a wonderful life, I'm able to kind of live more within my value structure and embody like what I find as my own personal truth.
Hmm. Your own personal truth. Hmm. Um, a little mini tangent. So, can I ask you what sign your is your is your Vesta in like Virgo, or what sign is your Vesta in?
Oh, I don't know. I don't use the asteroids.
Mm.
I use the traditional seven and the three outers.
Okay, okay, all right, cool,
Yeah,
cool.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah, totally. What's been your experience with vision and judgment? Um, when I think about vision, for whatever reason, my mind goes to the Pisces Virgo axis, and how, with what we see, our judgment can come through so quickly sometimes. So I'm kind of curious about, I guess, whatever it is that you are experiencing and then coming to understand.
Um, I would say as far as judgment, so like the process of like seeing and then judging and or analyzing a situation, a thing, an object, a whatever. Um, it's more intuitive. Like I'm like, okay, I'm not like quick to judge. I'm not slow to judge. I go off of like what's that voice inside of me saying? Um,
And this isn't the sort of higher judgment, like discerning, deciding. It's not the beautiful judgment that like Libra gives. Um, I mean, really, well, I mean, it could be, I suppose, but I mean more of the kind of mundane, everyday sort of judging, you know? Hmm, hmm.
Judging every day. So like judging what needs to be done, judging like uh
I think Virgo judgment, critiquing or criticism, Yeah, especially because you really do feel like you have such a hopeful, so it's cool. It feels like it's this kind of what's that word? Dia, there's a word. There's that kind of dual kind of, you know.
Yeah, I'm pretty critical, pretty critical person. Uh, I know what I like. I know what I don't like. Um, I am somewhat finicky and picky about when it comes to things. Um, as far as like how things are done, um, how like, certain foods I like, foods I don't. Those are just like plain examples. But yeah, I'm pretty critical. I'm also very critical on myself, like I was saying before with that, like wanting to be the best at everything and kind of getting down when I'm not good at some sort of skill I'm learning and or like emotional state, pessimism. Uh yeah, I'm pretty critical. I'm a pretty critical person, and maybe that's just the fact that, my sun is in Virgo, rules my ascendant. So, the person driving the ship of my life, the steering wheel, um, is relatively someone that ultimately judges a lot and weighs out situations. Um, I wouldn't say I'm like a judgy person. I'm like, yeah, you do you. Like you're that person. I'm more judgmental about my life, who I am, um, like how I live my life, how I do certain things, um, in that sense.
And lastly, um, Capricorn is also a spiritual sign. It's the sign of the disciple. Um, is there a desire to build something of lasting spiritual significance in your life? Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm always so like I've always been kind of like I guess you could say like a spiritual person. I wasn't raised religious or anything. I kind of always believed in something else. I'm not one to have like some sort of crazy spiritual routine or ritual or daily practice where I sit down and meditate or like sit at my altar. Like I was saying before, it's kind of when I'm inspired or when I feel the moment's right. But I definitely I'm always kind of searching for that like, oh, this is solid. I found it, Like an example is like working with deities. I'm really getting into that realm and I'm kind of exploring different um Greek and Roman deities to work with and to kind of have offerings to. Um, but yeah, I definitely see like, and the sixth house is also a place of sacrifice. So you could say it's a spiritual sacrifice where I'm willing to, um, put in the hard work to develop some sort of intimate connection with a higher power, a divine cosmos, whatever you want to call the energy of everything that connects us.
Is that like a more of like a newer thing, or is it something that's kind of been developing for you over, I guess, a series of years?
Um, I've gotten more serious about it over the past like 2-ish years, 3-ish years, 4-ish years, mainly because I have more time on my hands. Because I'm not full-time working, so I have more time. It's also when I really started like practicing astrology with the public is when I started to become more serious about some sort of spiritual practice. Um, so like astrology definitely like was the kickstart for all of that. Um, but yeah, it's been recent where I've I've started to take things a little bit more seriously where I've done like mini rituals, stuff like that. Spell jars, whatever you want to call it.
Um, uh, Interesting. That word deities has been coming up for me a lot these days. So so it caught my interest when you also said it. I'm like, what does that mean? Is there something I should be um, asking or something?
Yeah.
Um, have you ever heard of the festival of Navratri?
No, I have not.
Navratri means like Nova, Nav, 9. And Ratri is celebration, but it's like the celebration of the 9 goddesses. Um, I'm not a Hindu, but I'm interested in all sorts of things, right? And it's a Hindu celebration. Um, and something that I was learning from a meditation center that I go to is that uh, these 9 goddesses or 9 Shaktis, goddesses are called Shaktis, and Shakti means power. And how they were saying that these 9 powers are really the powers of the soul. So there's Goddess Durga, and she's all about strength. And so it's that sort of internal strength that we need to muster in order to have the courage to, like ride a lion. Goddess Kali, she's about killing all the devils. So destroying the vices that we know that we need to destroy within us. Lakshmi is about abundance, and she represents, like what you were saying about loving cleanliness so much. The home has to be clean in order for Lakshmi to visit the home. So she symbolizes the sort of wealth that comes from spiritual cleanliness and purity of the heart and these things. So I feel like you might enjoy looking it up. Of course, a lot of the symbolism that's online isn't spoken of as symbolism, but when, just like, I imagine when you read stories about the Greek gods and goddesses, Roman gods and goddesses, you seek to understand the symbolism. So I'm sure you might very much enjoy doing the same thing with the 9 goddesses. And lastly, on my ramble, I learned that they're also called Shiv Shaktis. So they're the goddesses, the divine powers, the lovers of the beloved. And the beloved would be of Shiva. So Shiv Shakti, Shiva. And how, Shiva is kind of represented by a physical being. But what I'm learning at the meditation center is that Shiva is like the name of God, source, and he's really just a point of light. So like the Shiv Lingam, like separate from what we see as being a human from the physical costume. He's all about light, and that these goddesses are really just the purity, the power that exists within us that we've forgotten. And so when we remember Shiva, we remember our own personal power and strength. So, yeah,
I like that. I'll have to check it out.
totally. Please do. Yeah.